Hello, my name is Dante Renee, and welcome to the 10 Room Bizarro YouTube page where I talk about films that I believe need to be talked about more. Tonight's film is 1976's Once Upon a Girl. 1976's Once Upon a Girl. This is put out by Severin Films. You can see the back here. Oh boy, what are those mice doing? This is put out by Severin Films right here. And this is still in print, but it has been out. They did release it, and it's been out for quite some time now, for a few years. So I think 2006 is when it was officially released. So this is 1976's Once Upon a Girl. On the front, it says, uncut, uncensored, and incredibly unsuitable for children. Now, why would it actually mention children at all? That is because this is an animated film. And this is an animated film that is X-rated and from the 70s. And as somebody says on the front here, shock cinema, hilariously filthy, like watching a XXX version of a Hanna-Barbera Saturday morning cartoon. Well, if you were a child of the 80s or you just watched 80s cartoons, Hanna-Barbera cartoons, or even Disney from the 80s and even from the late 70s. Supposedly, the animators for this film were actually Disney animators, and young women at that, who I believe were kind of anonymous in animating this particular film. Let's look at 1976's Once Upon a Girl. And, you know, this is a very, very unique film. Say it hands down. I've reviewed on this YouTube page recently the Belladonna of Sadness, which is an Asian animated film that is for adults. But this is quite different and couldn't even be compared in the same family at all. And so let's get into this and let's look at this film that is about 80 minutes long. This is a movie that actually has some live action in it, some actual real people, real filming, real situations mixed in with the animation. This is a film that essentially works off of an anthology format of popular children's stories. And Mother Goose, the wraparound story, takes place in a real courtroom with its real people, a real environment, and Mother Goose is on trial for the real stories. What was the real story of Jack and the Beanstalk? What was the real story of Little Red Riding Hood and Cinderella? Well, the real stories were too shocking to tell, and now Mother Goose is on trial. And so the wraparound story continually goes to Mother Goose and real live action people at the courtroom, and all of the people in the courtroom, and I guess the witnesses and people on the jury, and then we have the animated film actually telling the stories. And there are three stories that are told in here. We have Jack and the Beanstalk, we have Cinderella, and then we have Little Red Riding Hood. Wow. So let's get into this film here. That essentially gives you a little bit of the vibe here, and this is a very, very interesting film because the wraparound story has a quirky vibe to it, a quirky, sexy vibe to it. To almost feel comfortable in a Benny Hill episode from the 70s, that kind of sexy TV show, that wacky, goofy, sexy British TV show. You can look that up, Benny Hill. And so basically, but the animation itself is not quirky like that. The animation itself in this film is actually very straightforward. It's very believable. It's very real in what a Hanna-Barbera cartoon would have been like in the 80s and what a Disney cartoon would have been like. It doesn't remind me much of Disney, and I didn't watch a lot of Disney when I was a kid, but it reminds me more of the Saturday morning cartoons in America. Saturday morning cartoons like Dungeons and Dragons and things like that. In terms of the animation is excellent in this film. The animation really looks like a regular high budget children's cartoon from the 70s or 80s, like Scooby-Doo, Archie, and the animation is spectacular and the art is spectacular. So let's get into this film a little bit here. This is supposedly rated X. Now, I've seen animation before that is for adults, And I will say flat out right now, here on this YouTube review, that this is the most X-rated animated movie I've ever seen thus far. This right here, Once Upon a Girl. The music in this film is awesome. There's great music in this film. You would never expect it. Once again, it's like a full-blown high-budget children's cartoon series. You know, the kind of music, even better than that music. But the music reminds me of 80s, like an 80s video game, fantasy music. And I wrote this down here. One part reminded me of Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. This really weird scene with a harp. And a harp that makes people horny. And the sounds were so weird, so dark, so twisted. Very interesting synthy, cartoonish guitar playing in the music as well. And we also have, well, actually, the guitar playing we have is like real acoustic, excuse me, picking in the film. Almost reminds you of a little bit of a southern vibe. And that's mostly in the wraparound story. The wraparound story has that acoustic picking, but the most interesting music is during the animated sequences. And the most interesting sound design, and obviously animation and visual art is in the animation. And this is animation that is real drawn animation. This is not the computer age like the modern days. And essentially we're looking at three different children's stories that have become much more adult than you ever remember them to be. This is a film that I wrote down here. I thought it was hard to describe, but very creatively pornographic and crazy and weird and vulgar and kinky and very taboo and very against the grain and very boundary pushing and very offensive and very shocking. I mean, it's almost more shocking than it is titillating. And you know, you're wondering titillation versus shock. And how much of that has to do with the fact that it's animated like a children's cartoon from the late 70s or the 80s? How much of that has to do with that? Your shock. But there's no way in hell this could be a live action film, because there'd be things in here that would be illegal, like you know, bestiality and things like that involving a frog. Seriously. So let's look at some of the things here. But this is a very creative adult cartoon. It's very creative. It's not just, you know, slapped together just to be, you know, titillating and X-rated and blah 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 blah. You know, as a film itself, it's very interesting. It's very entertaining. It's very amusing, and it actually quite shocked me, to be totally honest with you, at times. There are three stories, and you start off with Jack and the Beanstalk, then you go to Cinderella, then you go to, you end with Little Red Riding Hood, and then the wraparound story. The Jack and the Beanstalk story, by far, is the most shocking story in the bunch. And then we kind of have Cinderella, that kind of seems, you know, not as shocking, and then all of a sudden there are a couple of moments that just were like, what? That shock you really bad. And then the third story is very creative, very amusing, a great end story to the film that is also just filled with nudity. This is a film, yes, you see vaginas, you see breasts, you see butts. You're not really seeing explicit sex per se, but and for some reason you only see penises erect within men's pants. Within men's pants, you don't actually see the real. Actually, I'm sorry, I'm totally wrong. No, you see hard, erect, naked man's penises in this film as well. That's correct, and you also see sperm and licking of the genitals, holding, doing things to the genitals, intercourse. What you don't see really explicitly is like penis in vagina, but you see, you know, tongue, you see whole body. I mean, it's very difficult to, but I mean, this really is shocking. It really shocking. There are some sequences, particularly in Jack and the Beanstalk, that'll just freaking floor you. But like I said, if it was just like some animation that was just a shock, it would actually be, it could be deemed boring or something. But instead, this is a film that's actually so creative in its X-rated nature, that it actually is using the X-rated nature to do things that are very, very interesting. But yes, we have elements of animals and young people and sibling incest, bestiality. I mean, it's all in here. It's craziness. There's one sequence in here where you're inside of a vagina. I mean, Once Upon a Girl is definitely. I mean, I've never seen anything like it before, and I can't. I mean, I can't picture anything like this today because of this of the great care in the animation, and it looks like the budget in the animation. The executive producer for this film, by the way, I believe produced Alice Cooper's Welcome to My Nightmare concert in the 70s, which was based off of his Welcome to My Nightmare concert. Very interesting indeed. But this is truly an X-rated cartoon, very politically incorrect. I mean, political correctness didn't even exist like that in 1976. But I mean, this film would be blasted today. It'd be utterly blasted, and it's too creative for the pornography of today, and it's too interesting and entertaining for the pornography of today, and it's way too X-rated, and it's way too offensive. For possibly the pornography of today in its childlike nature. This is a film that is utilizing innocence in the characters and in the story, but yet not innocent, and even a darkness and an extreme shocking kind of vulgarity throughout the film as well. This is definitely a film that if you watched it and you're a fan of sleazy films, and you're a fan of exploitation, you're a fan of weird, bizarre, underground, what the F am I watching? This would definitely be a great film for you right off the bat. Great music, as I said before, and it's, we have homosexuality, we have everything in here. Like I said before, we have all ages and siblings, and some of the stories are even interesting in and of themselves, and you start to get wrapped up in what you're watching, and then all of a sudden, holy crap, not a second goes by where there's not something, very, very explicitly sexual going on in some form or fashion, except in the Cinderella story, which has some lapses, and it's very interesting at that, and then all of a sudden the climax happens, sometimes literally. So... And what's even more interesting is when you realize that the animators are mostly younger women. And when you watch the film, you can kind of maybe get that vibe even with the penises in the film and things like that. This is Once Upon a Girl. You will never look at children's stories the same way again. And it is... It's quite shocking because you're seeing everything, and you're even seeing, rape. There's romance as well, and there's even a dose of very, very funny things also. Very, very humorous, satirical statements as well, especially in the Cinderella story, at the end of the Cinderella story. So this is Once Upon a Girl, put out by Severin Films, shamelessly and bravely. Shamelessly, as they say. And it's still in print. This is Once Upon a Girl from 1976. Oh boy. Thank you so much for watching the 10 Room Bizarre YouTube page, where I talk about films that I believe need to be talked about more. And yes, by the way, this needs to be talked about more. And hey, it's also erotic too. I could see this film being erotic. People watch it, just for some kicks. Yeah, but also if you're, it's all animated, so it's not real stuff going on there. You know what I'm saying? So it's not really illegal. Some of it, I don't know. A frog? A frog?